I don't know if it's the same in Wisconsin, but we Minnesotans are notorious for our long, drawn-out goodbyes, our excruciatingly extended rituals of farewell and leave-taking. There's even a term for it, the Minnesota goodbye. I remember, for example, when I was a child, and our family would be visiting relatives on Minnesota's Iron Range. The moment would eventually arrive when someone, usually my father, had to announce that it was time for us to leave. And of course, he didn't come right out and say that. That would have been too direct. Instead, he would set down his cup on the coffee table. He'd put his hands squarely on the arms of the chair as if about to get up, and he'd say, "Well, I suppose," confident that his intention had been clearly communicated, he would then ease back into his chair a little bit, like he wasn't quite serious about leaving, and the conversation would continue for a while longer in the living room. Eventually, the group would migrate out into the kitchen, where another round of storytelling would ensue, perhaps as one more cup of coffee was poured for the road. After a couple of refills, my dad would speak up from his seat at the kitchen table saying something like, "Well, I guess it's time to saddle up," or his favorite, "I guess we'd better get this show on the road." More lingering goodbyes took place at the kitchen door, after which the whole house party spilled down the stairs and out along the sidewalk to the car, chatting all the way. Sometimes even the neighbors would join in if they happened to be around. And only when the car windows were finally rolled up manually and the key was turned in the ignition could the Minnesota goodbye really be considered complete. Even at that, I remember more than one occasion when, after some visiting family friends had seemingly made their escape from our house, my parents would pile us kids into the car and we would escort the visitors all the way out to the old railroad bridge that used to mark the edge of town. And there my dad would toot his horn a couple of times to bid them bon voyage, and then we finally headed back home. Now, when a minister leaves a congregation, the choreography of leave-taking is not nearly so exhausting as that, thank God. But it still takes time and intention to do it well, and I want to do it well. Saying goodbye is important. The Unitarian Universalist Association's Transitional Ministry Handbook, addressed to both congregations and clergy in transition, says it plainly. Whatever qualities a ministry may have, nothing will shape its impact more than how the ministry ends and the perceptions of that ending. How a ministry ends will affect not only how that ministry is remembered, that is to say, the shared ministry, and regarded, but also how subsequent ministries, lay or clergy-led, are experienced. So it's in that spirit that I want to say goodbye, in a way that honors our time together and that serves as a kind of future-focused farewell blessing on your mission and your vision. The Time for All Ages this morning was based on a 1978 article by the church consultant Roy Oswald, and that article became a classic. Well, a classic if you're a minister anyway. It is a classic. The article was called "Running Through the Thistles," and in it, Oswald did indeed draw upon his experience of growing up in rural Saskatchewan. I can still remember, he says, being lifted up by his two older brothers and running with his feet wheeling in midair, running full speed across 20 feet of prickly thistles, yelping in pain all the way through. When the three of us reached the black soil on the other side, we would immediately hit the dirt and start pulling out a few thistle ends that stuck in our feet. "I got 4 briars. How many do you get was a sample of our post-agony conversation. Now, for Oswald, a church consultant, this story served as a metaphor for how some pastors approach leaving a congregation, whether voluntarily or involuntary, whether to retire or to take up another ministry elsewhere. They rightly assume that there will be pain involved, and so their approach is to run through it as fast as they can. So comparing the process of leaving a congregation to a mad dash through a field full of thistles symbolizes for Oswald the emotional brambles and briars of pastoral relationships, those sticky and sometimes tangled and prickly feelings that emerge whenever one ends a relationship that has grown up over time, becoming intimate and meaningful and complex and layered with significance. Now, granted, our relationship has only been 2 years' duration of a very part-time ministry, hardly enough to become overly entangled and enmeshed in one another's lives. But I do not want to underestimate the importance of the grief that comes at the time of any goodbye. As I've grown older, I've come to understand and appreciate that the importance of that grief work is at the very heart of ministry. Grieving and helping others to grieve is what might be called an essential function of the ministerial job description. It's not the only essential function, of course, but it's at the very core of ministry. It took me a long time to learn that truth, that grieving is at the heart of ministry. That in the words of the poet William Blake, it's one of the hymns in our hymn book, joy and woe are woven fine, clothing for the soul divine. It is right, it should be so. We were made for joy and woe. And when this we rightly know, safely through the world we go. So rightly known, rightly understood, the road to joy passes through the portal of grief. And that is true not only at the time of ending, but every day, many times each day. This time of ministerial departure, though, offers a unique opportunity to model and reflect on the work of grieving and letting go. As Oswald put it in a word addressed directly to clergy, this then may be our final act of ministry to a congregation. We may be able to model for them ways in which they can gain closure with significant others. Perhaps we can visualize a congregational member trying to cope with imminent death, being grateful to a pastor who taught them how to die by the manner in which the pastor left that parish. So Oswald explicitly compares the experience of leaving a congregation to a journey through Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's famous 5 stages of dying and grieving. Now, while saying that leaving a ministry is akin to dying may sound somewhat exaggerated and spiritually pretentious, I have found there to be some wisdom in this comparison over the years. The experience of loss and grieving, after all, is far more universal than simply the occasional biological death. Any loss calls forth grief, whether the loss of a job, a relationship, a belief system, a possession, a capacity, or a ministry. In Kubler-Ross's model, there's a certain symmetry between dying and grieving. The same emotional tasks confront the dying person as those who are left to grieve the loss. Similarly, the tasks of closure that come at the end of a ministry belong to both congregation and clergy, and they mirror each other in many ways. And just as with any other kind of dying, ministerial endings can bring forth a complicated mixture of emotions: grief, sadness, joy, anxiety, relief, anger, gratitude, excitement. Not everyone feels the same way at the end of a ministry, and we do well to recognize and honor those differences. In any case, no matter what the mixture of feelings may be, it's important to take the time to reflect on those emotions and to see them as cues and invitations to deeper questions. What has this ministry, this relationship been about? What have we learned with and from each other? What stories have we shaped and shared together? What road have we traveled? What journey have we taken? Only after these kinds of questions have been addressed is our ending accomplished. Only then is our Minnesota goodbye complete. Now, just as people have different needs and styles of grieving, so too we all have what I call different exit styles. Psychologists have shown that a person's way of disengaging from any situation tends to follow a consistent and characteristic pattern that repeats itself across all kinds of situations throughout our life. Think, for example, about how you typically leave a party. Do you exit early, or do you stay to the bitter end? Do you just put on your hat and jacket and silently slip out the door? Or do you turn off the music and loudly announce your departure? Probably your exit style, like mine, is somewhere in the middle. Perhaps you typically say goodbye to the host and a few friends and then discreetly leave without making too big a fuss about it. The point is, it's not about right or wrong. The point is that everyone tends to have a particular style of leaving, a set pattern of disengaging with people and situations, a set way of saying goodbye. It stays remarkably consistent whether we're saying farewell to a casual acquaintance, to a very deep friendship, a 20-year marriage, or a 20-year job, or finally saying goodbye to others at the time of my own inevitable death. Being aware of our own preferred exit style allows us to be more conscious and intentional and having a little more freedom in how we say our goodbyes. Paul Simon famously sang that there were 50 ways to leave your lover, 50 ways to get yourself free. And there are indeed many ways to say goodbye, but not all are equally healthy or helpful. Not all of them leave the partners to a relationship genuinely free. In this context, freedom means being fully able to enter into the next stage of our respective journeys. The freedom we need is the freedom to say goodbye and hello. And we say one in order to say the other. John Hughes, a British psychologist and social worker, has said that most people in his care are there because they didn't learn how to say hello and goodbye. He gives us an example, a little boy who, to put it mildly, wasn't welcomed into his family. His way of introducing himself on the playground was by stealing another child's toy. He had never been taught to enter into a relationship, to say hello. On the other hand, a grown adult who has never learned to say goodbye to their parents, to let go of them, will continue unconsciously but persistently to project those unresolved family issues onto subsequent intimate relationships, usually to detrimental effect. So the challenge is to become conscious and intentional about the spiritual practice of saying goodbye for the sake of a deeper hello, and for the spiritual practice of saying hello in full awareness that the time will come to say goodbye. The glass is always already broken. The time of a minister's departure is an especially good opportunity to learn this practice and to learn from that practice of saying goodbye. Leaving well, write the authors of the Transitional Ministry Handbook, is an act of ministry. It is a time of reflecting on the accomplishments and learnings of the ministry, of expressing gratitude for the opportunity, and of assuring the congregation that they will move to a new future. I won't say much about the first two. As far as accomplishments go, you would have done it on your own without me. You have many accomplishments, and you will continue to be an active and engaged fellowship, a congregation that's making a difference in this community. That's very clear to me, that this is a congregation that accomplishes things. So the fact that you would have done it without me is not a commentary on my lack of leadership, but rather on your capacity and commitment. The second point about learning, there's so much there. I would say if you've learned one thing, I hope it's the importance of being a learning organization, a learning congregation. A religious fellowship is more than a school, but it must be at least a school. That is to say, it must be a community that's capable of guiding individual journeys of spiritual exploration and ethical practice in the context of a covenanted community. I trust that you will continue to be a learning congregation. But I do want to take some time here to express my deep gratitude to the fellowship as a whole for your generosity, for your hospitality, for your commitment to this congregation. And I thank you also for your giving me this opportunity to conclude my ministry. I'm just very aware that this could be my last sermon to a Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. So I thank you for that opportunity. I want to thank the individuals, too many to name by name individually, but thank those of you who have shared your lives with me, whether that was over lunch or coffee or sometimes in a class that I taught, could have been an email or sharing during joys and sorrows, a conversation in the parking lot. The key phrase is, you've shared your lives with me. Ministry is utterly impotent without that kind of sharing. The degree to which that takes place is directly correlated with the strength of ministry. And again, that's whether that's a lay ministry or a ordained ministry. Thank you to the teams, the volunteer time and energy and talent that you devote to your teams, and to as particular to the leaders of those teams. The language of teams is so appropriate because of that energy and that focus and that commitment together. I want to thank the staff. I want to, Diane mentioned Nancy. Not only was of course, a wonderful musician, but she was so generous in sharing her home with us. I want to thank Eric, who has stepped in and done wonderful work, or I know it's work, but it sounds like play. It sounds like the joy of music Eric brings to us, and I deeply appreciate that. I want to thank Carmen for her work with the children. Carmen is a gifted and talented professional, and you're fortunate to have her. And finally, I want to thank Heather for her. I think Heather puts the ministry in administration. She is utterly organized and administratively creative and quick and efficient, but she also has that heart of that caring heart. That's why I say it's the ministry of administration. She does that so well, and she's been such a help to me. And finally, I want to thank the board. The board is the body to which I am technically accountable, contractually accountable, and the relationship with the board, I think, with any board and any minister, is the most important relationship to tend. And I have felt supported, challenged, and engaged by both this current board and last year's board. I want to thank Donna and Marilyn in particular for their leadership, but the board operates as a whole, and you can feel it when it's happening. And when I felt that here with your board, I thought, this place is in good hands. This is in a solid and healthy place. So thank you all. I will miss you. I will miss being here. My sense of loss is real. The ministry of leaving, if I can put it that way, involves a kind of leaning into the experience of dying, of letting go, and of modeling the paradoxical practice of sharing one's whole heart while simultaneously releasing attachments, setting aside a role, and letting go of relationships. It's about knowing that the glass is always already broken. That's what makes it precious, our time together, or your time together with anyone, with each other. It's precious and sacred. As with the Minnesota goodbye, there's a certain ritual quality that accompanies healthy ministerial departures. And worship creates a space, such a space, within which we have the opportunity to say goodbye in ways that are conscious and intentional and graceful as can be, and in a way that is continuous with and a culmination of the work of ministry that we have been doing together all along. I said earlier that the Minnesota goodbye wouldn't be complete without some consideration of the questions: what has this relationship, this ministry been about? What have we learned from each other? What stories have we shaped and shared together? What road have we traveled? What journey have we taken? Or perhaps you're pondering what you know about your own exit style, your own preferred way of saying goodbye. These are things that we can now, this time of congregational response, take a few minutes for sharing.